lone rancher for years, until saw Apache woman beaten for birth 2 girls. Samuel Green had been living alone on the wide, open plains of Arizona for more than a decade. The land stretched endlessly in every direction, a mixture of golden grass, rugged rocks, and distant mountains that glimmered faintly under the early morning sun. He had no neighbors for miles, no towns to visit regularly, and no family who could reach him even if they wanted to. In this isolation, Samuel had built his life from the ground up, carving out a small ranch that served as both his home and his livelihood. His cabin was modest but sturdy, made of rough-hewn logs he had carefully cut and stacked himself. A stone fireplace dominated the main room, its chimney puffing gray smoke into the cold winter air. Inside, the furniture was simple: a bed, a wooden table, a few chairs, and shelves holding cans, dried goods, and tools. Every item had a purpose, and Samuel had a place for everything. The cabin smelled faintly of pine and smoke, a smell that reminded him of the first day he had built it, hammering and sawing under the harsh Arizona sun. Life on the plains was not easy. Samuel woke with the sun and worked from dawn to dusk, tending his small herd of cattle and a few horses he had trained himself. He repaired fences, mended tools, chopped wood for the fire, and made sure the water troughs were full. Each day followed a rhythm that he had come to love: the quiet of the morning, the rustling of the grass in the wind, the distant calls of hawks circling above. In these simple tasks he found a kind of peace, a satisfaction that the modern world, with its noise and constant motion, could never provide. Despite the solitude, Samuel was not lonely in the way some people might think. His dog, a large, shaggy sheepdog named Rufus, kept him company. Rufus followed him everywhere on the ranch, sometimes napping near the fireplace while Samuel worked, sometimes bounding ahead on the trail when Samuel rode out to check on the cattle. And then there was his horse, a sturdy bay named Apache, who carried him across the plains with a steady, reliable gait. Samuel talked to them often, telling Rufus stories of the day or speaking to Apache about where they would ride. In these conversations, he found a sense of connection, even if it wasn't with another human being. Over the years, Samuel had grown used to the quiet. At first, it had been difficult. He remembered the first winter, when the cold bit through his coat and the wind howled outside the cabin, shaking the walls. The nights had been long and empty, and he had spent hours staring into the fireplace, thinking about the family he had left behind, and wondering if he had made a mistake in coming here. But slowly he had learned to love it, the silence, the vast sky, and the endless horizon that seemed to promise freedom from the troubles of the world. Samuel was a careful man, not reckless or easily frightened. He had learned to respect the land and the animals, and he had learned to anticipate danger. Coyotes sometimes prowled near his herd, and he had to be ready to protect them. Storms could come quickly, bringing rain, hail, or snow that made travel dangerous. But Samuel trusted himself and his instincts. He knew when to act, when to wait, and when to ride out into the unknown. Over the years, this knowledge had kept him alive and allowed him to live peacefully in the wilderness. Yet, despite all this preparation, Samuel had a deep awareness that he could not control everything. There were moments when the vastness of the plains reminded him of how small he really was. Standing on a ridge one evening, he had watched the sun sink behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers and dry grass, and in that moment, he felt both awe and humility. He was a small figure in a grand, untamed world, and he had learned to respect it. Over time, Samuel's routine became almost meditative. He would rise with the sun, tend to the animals, repair fences, and prepare food. He hunted small game for meat, gathered wild herbs, and occasionally ventured into the nearby canyons for fresh water. At night, he would sit by the fire, read the few books he had brought, or simply watch the stars. In these moments, he felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense that he was living exactly as he wanted. But beneath this contentment, there was always a quiet longing, a tiny flicker of something missing. He sometimes wondered if there was more to life than solitude, if there were people somewhere he could connect with, if there were stories he had yet to hear, or lives he could touch. One spring morning, while riding across the plains to check on a distant part of his ranch, Samuel noticed something unusual. Smoke was rising faintly in the distance, curling above the horizon in a thin column. At first he thought it might be from a small campfire, perhaps a traveler passing through, but as he got closer he realized that it was not a normal fire. It was accompanied by sounds of shouting, cries, and the sharp clang of a struggle. Samuel slowed his horse, his instincts sharpening. He had never been one to involve himself in the affairs of others, but the noises carried urgency, pain, and fear. Cautiously, Samuel approached the scene, keeping to the cover of the low hills. Through the tall grass, he saw a group of men surrounding a young Apache woman. She was on the ground, struggling to rise, while the men struck at her and shouted angrily. Samuel's heart sank. He could see that she had recently given birth, her body weak and her movements slow. The men were angry, their voices harsh, and Samuel understood quickly that they were punishing her because she had delivered daughters instead of sons. The injustice of it struck him hard. He had grown used to the harshness of life on the plains, but this cruelty felt different, unbearable. For a long moment, Samuel hesitated. He knew that intervening could be dangerous. The men outnumbered him, and he was alone, far from anyone who could help. But as he watched the woman try to protect her newborn children, something inside him shifted. He could not stand by and watch this happen. For the first time in many years, the isolation he had cherished seemed irrelevant. There were moments in life when action mattered more than safety, and this was one of them. He tightened his grip on the reins, steadied his breath, and prepared to ride closer. He could not yet see what he would do, but he knew that he would act. Samuel had spent years surviving on his own, and now he realized that survival was not just about protecting oneself. It was about protecting what was innocent and vulnerable. The thought of those two tiny children, born into danger and helpless, filled him with determination. As he approached, he kept low, moving carefully through the brush so that the men would not notice him immediately. He studied their positions, looking for a way to intervene without putting himself at unnecessary risk. He remembered all the lessons the plains had taught him: patience, observation, and strategy. He also remembered the countless hours he had spent learning to ride, to handle animals, and to face danger. This knowledge was his ally now, and he trusted it completely. By the time he was close enough to see the fear and pain in the woman's eyes, Samuel had made his decision. He would not wait for anyone else to help. If he could save even one life, he would. The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the sound of shouting closer, and Samuel felt a strange mixture of fear and resolve. This was a moment that could change everything. A moment that would test all he had learned during his years on the plains. As the sun climbed higher, casting light on the scene, Samuel prepared to act. The woman's cries were now mixed with the soft, wailing noises of her newborn daughters. The sight was unbearable, yet it also sparked something he had not felt in a long time: a connection, a sense of responsibility, and an awakening of compassion that had been dormant in him for years. He was a man who had lived alone, who had chosen isolation over company, But in this instant, he realized that life was more than surviving. It was about standing up for what was right, even when it came at a cost. The plains, with all their beauty and harshness, had shaped him, but they had also prepared him for this moment. And as he readied himself to ride into the unknown, Samuel Green understood that his life as a lone rancher was about to change forever. Samuel Green had never been one to step into the affairs of others. The years of solitude had taught him to mind his own business and to avoid unnecessary trouble. Yet, as he crept closer to the shouting, hidden among the tall grass and rugged terrain, he could not shake the urgency in the scene before him. The cries of the woman, her frail form struggling under the weight of her newborn daughters, struck something deep within him. A part of him that had long been silent, buried beneath years of isolation. He observed the group of men carefully. There were 4 of them, all mounted on horses, each one looking older, hardened by life on the plains. They were shouting in a language he didn't fully understand, but the anger and threat in their voices were clear. The woman, who could not have been more than 20, had recently given birth. Her body was still weak, and she tried to shield her tiny daughters from the blows, but she was too small, too exhausted. Samuel felt a wave of anger rise in him. The injustice of punishing a mother for her children's gender made his hands clench around the reins. For a moment, he considered retreating. He could ride away, leave the scene, and continue his life as it had been. After all, he had survived for years on his own, facing storms, wild animals, and the loneliness of the plains. But the image of the mother cradling her helpless babies, her eyes wide with fear, kept him frozen in place. He could not turn away. Not this time. Samuel's mind raced as he tried to plan his approach. He needed to act quickly but carefully. He knew he could not take all 4 men head-on. It would be impossible. But perhaps he could startle them, create confusion, and give the woman a chance to escape. He scanned the area, noting the rocks, the trees, and the uneven ground. There were ways to use the terrain to his advantage. He had spent years learning to read the land, understanding how wind and shadows worked, and now all of that knowledge was crucial. He mounted his horse quietly, urging Apache forward with a soft nudge. The animal moved carefully, its hooves silent against the dry grass. Samuel kept low in the saddle, using a small ridge as cover. Every muscle in his body was tense, every sense alert. He watched the men closely, noticing that 2 of them were focused entirely on the woman, their attention consumed by their anger, while the other 2 were slightly distracted, looking around for any possible witnesses. That was his chance. With a deep breath, Samuel spurred Apache forward. The horse leaped over the small ridge, galloping toward the group with a speed that surprised even Samuel. The men had not expected anyone to approach, and their attention was divided. The sudden sound of hooves pounding against the earth made them freeze for a brief moment. Samuel shouted, his voice loud and commanding, startling both the men and the woman. "What do you think you are doing?" he yelled, his voice carrying across the field. The men turned, faces twisted with anger and confusion. Samuel could see their surprise, the sudden realization that they were not dealing with a helpless woman alone. He raised a small stick, not a weapon, but enough to make himself seem larger and more threatening. The woman on the ground looked up at him with wide, uncertain eyes. She had never seen a stranger intervene on her behalf, and yet there was something in Samuel's stance, in the determination in his eyes, that made her feel a flicker of hope. She clutched her babies closer, still trembling, but ready to follow him if he could create a path to safety. Samuel's strategy was simple: create enough distraction and confusion that the men would back off. He shouted again, swinging the stick, and urged Apache to move closer. The horse neighed loudly, stamping its hooves and kicking up dust. The two men who had been slightly distracted turned fully toward Samuel, and in that moment the other two men hesitated. Their attention was split, their plan disrupted. "You leave her alone," Samuel shouted. "She is just a mother. Do you have no heart?" His words were raw, fueled by anger and a deep sense of justice. The men exchanged glances, uncertainty creeping into their expressions. They had not expected resistance. They had not considered that someone might risk themselves to protect a woman and her children. Using this moment, Samuel rode closer to the woman. "Get up," he called gently but firmly. "Follow me! Quick now!" The woman hesitated, fear making her freeze, but the urgency in his tone convinced her to act. She rose slowly, still weak from childbirth, clutching her daughters close. Samuel motioned for her to stay low and move with him, keeping Apache between them and the attackers. The men shouted again, but the sudden confusion worked in Samuel's favor. He urged Apache to gallop, weaving through rocks and uneven ground. The woman followed, stumbling at first but keeping pace, determined to protect her babies. Dust rose around them, the sound of hooves and shouting filling the air. Samuel could feel his heart pounding, not just from fear, but from the intensity of the moment. Every decision mattered now. One wrong move could put the woman and her children in more danger. Slowly, Samuel led them toward a small grove of trees he had noticed on the ridge. The thick branches offered cover, and the uneven ground would make it harder for the men to follow quickly. By the time they reached the grove, the attackers had lost sight of the woman, and their shouts were growing more distant. Samuel urged the woman to keep moving, to find safety among the trees. Finally, they stopped near a small stream, the sound of running water calming their nerves. The woman collapsed to the ground, exhausted but alive, holding her daughters tightly. Samuel dismounted, letting Apache rest, and approached her carefully. "You're safe now," he said softly. "No one will hurt you here." She looked at him, eyes wide with disbelief and gratitude. For the first time since the attack began, she allowed herself to breathe. I don't know who you are," she whispered. Why did you help me?" Samuel shrugged slightly, a small smile on his weathered face. "Because it was wrong. No one should be hurt for giving life to children. You have done nothing wrong. I couldn't just watch." His words were simple, but they carried weight. In that moment, the woman understood that this stranger, this lone rancher, had acted not out of obligation, but out of a sense of humanity. As the sun climbed higher, casting light through the trees, Samuel realized that this encounter would change his life. The plains had always been his world, but now they had shown him that there was more than survival. There was connection, there was responsibility, and there was the chance to make a real difference in someone else's life. The woman introduced herself as Taya, her voice quiet but firm. She had been living with her family on the outskirts of the settlement, trying to care for her children in a harsh world. Samuel listened as she spoke, learning about her struggles, the dangers she faced, and the resilience that had allowed her to survive thus far. He realized that her strength was remarkable, yet she had been subjected to cruelty simply for being a mother to daughters. For hours, Samuel helped Taya gather the supplies she would need to survive until she could return safely to her people. He used his knowledge of the land to find edible plants and clean water. He checked the paths they could take, ensuring that the men who had attacked her could not easily find them again. In every action, Samuel displayed the skills and experience he had accumulated over years of living alone, skills that now served a higher purpose than mere survival. As evening approached, Samuel and Taya found a safe spot to rest, hidden by trees and rocks. The woman held her daughters close, and Samuel sat quietly nearby, watching over them. There was a silence between them, but it was a comfortable one, filled with the unspoken understanding that they had both survived something extraordinary. Samuel felt a sense of purpose he had never known, a feeling that his years of solitude had prepared him for this very moment. For the first time in years, Samuel realized that life was not just about living alone, about tending cattle and surviving storms. Life could also be about protecting others, forming bonds, and standing up for what was right. He had spent so long in isolation, but now he understood that true courage sometimes meant stepping into the lives of others, risking comfort and safety for the sake of justice and compassion. That night, as the stars appeared over the plains, Samuel kept watch while Taya and her daughters slept. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of earth and grass, and he felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The encounter had been dangerous, frightening, and unexpected, yet it had awakened something in him that had been dormant for years, the desire to connect, to protect, and to make a difference. And so, as the firelight flickered across the grove, Samuel Green, the lone rancher of the Arizona plains, realized that his life of solitude had come to an end. He did not yet know how it would change, or what challenges lay ahead, but he knew that he could not ignore the responsibility that had been placed before him. For the first time in years, he felt alive not just for himself, but for someone else. The sun rose slowly over the Arizona plains, painting the sky in pale pinks and golds. Samuel Green had spent the night in a small grove, keeping watch while Taya and her newborn daughters slept. He had built a small fire to keep warm, but he had kept it low, careful not to draw attention. The events of the previous day weighed heavily on him. He had acted without hesitation to save Taya and her children, yet now that the danger had passed, he realized the challenges ahead were far from over. Taya woke at first light, her movements slow and careful as she held her daughters close. Samuel had placed soft blankets around them, keeping them warm through the cool desert morning. "You need to rest," he said gently, his voice calm. "I'll keep watch." "We're safe for now," Taya nodded, grateful but still wary. The fear in her eyes had not fully faded, and Samuel understood why. She had faced cruelty and injustice, and it would take time for her to trust that she was truly safe. Samuel offered her some food he had prepared: dried meat, bread, and fresh water from a nearby stream. Taya accepted, eating slowly, her body still weak from childbirth. Samuel watched her carefully, noting every movement, every sign of fatigue. He knew that survival was not just about protecting someone from immediate danger, but also about helping them regain their strength and confidence. This was a new challenge for him. He had spent years alone, relying only on himself, and now he had someone else depending on him. After breakfast, Samuel spoke softly. "We need to find a more secure place. The attackers might return, and we cannot stay out in the open for long." Taya listened carefully, her eyes following his every movement. She did not speak much, but her silence was not fear. It was observation. She was trying to understand him, to judge whether he could be trusted. Samuel knew he would have to earn that trust, and he resolved to do so patiently, without forcing her or the children into anything they were not ready for. They began moving slowly, Samuel leading Apache, and Taya following behind with her daughters cradled tightly in her arms. The terrain was rough, filled with rocky outcrops and scattered cacti, but Samuel navigated it with ease. He knew the plains intimately, the hidden paths, the safe water sources, and the places where one could rest without being seen. Taya followed, sometimes stumbling, but Samuel was always close enough to steady her. He could feel her tension gradually easing, a sign that she was beginning to trust his guidance. As they traveled, Samuel noticed how carefully Taya watched him. She seemed to measure every action, every word. He realized that she had lived in a world where every movement could be dangerous, where trust was earned slowly and carefully. He respected that. He spoke little, choosing his words carefully, letting his actions show his intentions. He helped her navigate tricky terrain, offered food and water, and encouraged her to rest when needed. In these small gestures, trust began to grow between them. Hours passed and they reached a small canyon sheltered by high rocks. The spot was hidden from view, and a small stream ran through it, providing fresh water. Samuel decided they would rest here for a while, giving Taya and her daughters time to recover. He set up a small fire, keeping it low, and helped Taya arrange a place for her children to sleep. For the first time since the attack, Taya allowed herself to breathe more freely. She looked at Samuel with a mixture of gratitude and cautious curiosity. "You saved us," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know how to thank you." Samuel shook his head. "No thanks needed," he replied simply. "It was the right thing to do. No one should be harmed for giving life to their children." Taya's eyes softened, and for a moment, the weight of fear lifted from her face. Samuel could see that the small gestures of care, providing food, offering protection, guiding her safely, were beginning to show her that he was different from the men who had attacked her. As the days passed, Samuel taught Taya how to move safely through the land. He showed her which paths were safe, where to find water, and how to avoid danger. He shared stories of his own life on the plains, of storms he had survived, of the animals he had raised, and of the quiet joys of living with the land rather than against it. Taya listened attentively, sometimes asking questions, sometimes simply observing. Through these exchanges, a bond grew between them, a bond rooted in respect, care, and shared experience. Samuel also learned about Taya's life. She spoke cautiously at first, but gradually she shared her experiences, the challenges of her family, the customs of her people, and the struggles she faced as a mother. Samuel listened without judgment, learning from her as much as she learned from him. He realized that this woman, who had faced so much hardship, was strong and resilient. She had endured suffering and injustice, yet she had not been broken. He admired her courage, and he felt a growing sense of responsibility to protect and support her. During one afternoon, as they rested by the stream, Samuel noticed that Taya was particularly quiet. She held her daughters close, staring into the water as if searching for answers. Samuel sat beside her, offering comfort without words. After a moment, Taya spoke. I never thought someone would help me," she said softly. "I have been alone, and I feared the world would always be cruel." Samuel nodded. "Ah, sometimes it is cruel," he said gently. "But there are moments of kindness too. We just have to find them." Taya looked at him, a faint smile appearing on her lips, and Samuel felt a warmth he had not experienced in years. The bond between them strengthened as they continued their journey. Samuel's protection allowed Taya to regain her confidence, and her presence brought a new sense of purpose to his life. He found himself thinking not just of survival, but of care, connection, and responsibility. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of belonging, not just in the land, but in the shared experience of helping someone in need. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the plains, Samuel and Taya sat together by the fire. The baby slept peacefully in her arms. Samuel reflected on how much his life had changed in such a short time. He had been a lone rancher, accustomed to solitude and self-reliance. Yet now he found joy in caring for another, in sharing his knowledge and skills, and in protecting those who could not protect themselves. The transformation was subtle but profound, and he welcomed it fully. The next day brought new challenges. Samuel had heard rumors that the men who had attacked Taya might be searching for her. Though he did not know their exact intentions, he knew it was not safe to remain in one place for long. He guided Taya and her daughters through hidden trails, teaching her how to move silently and observe her surroundings. Each step was cautious, deliberate, and measured. Samuel felt a deep sense of responsibility, knowing that the safety of these lives rested in his hands. Despite the tension and uncertainty, there were moments of quiet happiness. Samuel taught Taya how to care for her daughters using what the land provided: herbs for comfort, soft grasses for bedding, and clean water from hidden streams. Taya began to laugh softly at times, a sound Samuel had not heard in years. The babies grew stronger with each passing day, and their presence brought warmth and hope to the small, hidden world Samuel had created for them. As the days turned into weeks, Samuel and Taya developed an unspoken understanding. They communicated through actions, gestures, and shared routines. Samuel's guidance helped Taya feel safe and confident, while Taya's gratitude and resilience inspired Samuel to care more deeply than he ever had for another human being. Their connection was quiet, strong, and built on mutual respect, a bond that neither had expected but both had needed. Samuel realized that the world he had known, the lonely, self-reliant life on the plains, was no longer enough. There was more to life than survival. There was care, connection, and compassion. There was the responsibility of protecting those who could not protect themselves, and the joy that came from sharing knowledge, strength, and kindness. Samuel had been a lone rancher for years, but now he understood that true courage was not just about facing the elements. It was about facing the challenges of the heart and standing up for what was right, even when it meant stepping into someone else's life. By the time they settled into a small, hidden valley for the night, Samuel felt a profound sense of change within himself. The plains had shaped him, taught him patience, resilience, and strength, but Taya and her daughters had awakened a new part of him, a part that understood the importance of connection, compassion, and shared responsibility. Samuel knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be dangers, uncertainties, and challenges yet to face. But he also knew that he was no longer alone, and that together they could face whatever came their way. And so, as the fire flickered and the stars began to twinkle in the vast desert sky, Samuel Green and Taya sat together, watching over the sleeping children. For the first time in years, Samuel felt a sense of fulfillment and purpose that went beyond survival. He had stepped into someone else's life, acted with courage and compassion, and in doing so had found a new path, one that promised hope, trust, and the beginnings of a life shared with others. The seasons had changed on the Arizona plains since Samuel Green first rescued Taya and her daughters. Spring had given way to summer, and summer was slowly yielding to the crisp winds of autumn. The once lone rancher had grown accustomed to a life that was far from solitary. His days were no longer just about survival. They were about care, routine, and the steady rhythms of a household that had formed in the most unexpected of ways. Samuel had built a small addition to his cabin, creating a space for Taya and the children. The walls were rough-hewn like the original structure, but inside it was warm and welcoming. There were blankets stacked neatly, shelves with dried food and herbs, and small toys Samuel had fashioned from bits of wood and cloth. Every corner reflected care, thoughtfulness, and the presence of life beyond his own. For the first time, the cabin felt truly like a home. Taya moved with greater confidence now. Her steps were sure, her eyes bright with a mixture of relief and pride. She had learned to navigate the plains safely, to care for her daughters, and to work alongside Samuel in the routines of ranch life. The women in her community had taught her traditional skills, and Samuel had taught her the practical knowledge of surviving in the rugged wilderness. Together, they formed a partnership built on trust, respect, and the shared experience of facing danger and uncertainty. The two daughters were growing quickly. Their laughter echoed across the plains, a sound that warmed Samuel's heart more than the fire in his cabin ever could. He watched them run through the fields, tumble in the grass, and chase Apache the horse. Their tiny hands clutched at Samuel's clothes, their voices full of questions and curiosity about the world. He found himself teaching them lessons, not only about the land, but about kindness, fairness, and courage. Each day he felt a deeper connection, not just to the children, but to the life they were all building together. Despite the peace, Samuel never let his guard down entirely. He knew the world beyond the plains could still be harsh, and he remained vigilant. He continued to maintain his fences, check the herds, and watch the horizon for any signs of danger. Yet the work no longer felt lonely. Now it had purpose beyond survival. It had meaning because it was done for others, for the family he had chosen and nurtured. One afternoon, a traveler passing through the plains stopped near the cabin. Samuel greeted him cautiously but kindly, offering water and food. The traveler noticed Taya and the children and commented on the unusual sight of a lone rancher living with an Apache woman and her daughters. Samuel only smiled. He did not feel the need to explain. He had come to understand that life's meaning was not determined by what others thought, but by the bonds we form and the lives we touch. Taya often sat by the fire with Samuel in the evenings, sharing stories of her past, of her family, and of the lessons she had learned about resilience and hope. Samuel listened, sharing his own experiences, and through these conversations they found mutual understanding and companionship. It was a quiet kind of love, one that had grown from shared struggles, respect, and the joy of caring for others. There were no grand gestures or dramatic declarations, only the steady comfort of knowing someone was there day after day through the highs and lows of life. The children were growing strong, their days filled with learning and play. Samuel taught them about the animals, the stars and the plants that grew wild on the plains. Taya taught them her traditions, her songs, and the stories of her people. The blending of these teachings gave the children a sense of identity, balance, and understanding. Samuel often marveled at how much joy a small laugh or a simple hug could bring. He had once believed that life was about enduring hardship alone, but now he realized it was about sharing joy, love, and care with others. One evening, as the sun dipped below the distant mountains, Samuel stood at the edge of the plains, watching the horizon. The wind carried the scent of grass and wildflowers, and the sky was painted in shades of orange and pink. Taya came to stand beside him, her daughters playing nearby. She rested her hand lightly on his arm, a gesture of quiet comfort and connection. "You've changed my life," she said softly. Samuel nodded, the words heavy with meaning. "And you've changed mine," he replied. "I thought I knew what life was, but I only knew a part of it. You showed me the rest." The ranch had become more than a home. It had become a sanctuary. Samuel had helped Taya and her daughters survive, but they had given him something in return, a family, a purpose, and the deep satisfaction of caring for others. He realized that true strength was not only in surviving the harsh world, but in nurturing, protecting, and sharing life with those who needed it. He had faced storms, wild animals, and the dangers of isolation, but none of those compared to the fulfillment he felt in this simple, shared life. As autumn deepened, the family prepared for the coming winter. Samuel worked tirelessly repairing the fences, stacking firewood, and ensuring the animals were safe and fed. Taya helped as best she could, caring for the children, preparing food, and learning the skills Samuel had taught her. The daughters watched and helped where they could, learning lessons that would guide them throughout their lives. The sense of routine and preparation gave them all comfort, a shared understanding that they were ready to face whatever came next, together. Sometimes Samuel would sit quietly outside the cabin, watching the wind sweep across the plains, thinking about the years he had spent alone. He remembered the long winters, the quiet nights by the fire, the endless horizons. He thought about the solitude that had once been his world, and realized how much richer life had become since Taya and her daughters had entered it. The land was still wild and untamed, but now it was filled with laughter, care, and the quiet satisfaction of shared survival. There were still challenges, of course. The plains were not without danger, and Samuel remained alert. Yet each day brought moments of joy, small victories, and reassurance. He had learned to balance caution with care, to protect without controlling, and to nurture without overwhelming. The partnership he shared with Taya was based on mutual respect, trust, and the understanding that life was best faced together. One day, as the children ran freely through the fields, Samuel reflected on the journey that had brought them all together. He had been a lone rancher, living a life of solitude and self-reliance, yet a single moment of courage, stepping in to protect someone in need, had changed everything. That decision had set in motion a chain of events that brought joy, love, and family into his life. He realized that courage was not just about facing danger, but about opening one's heart to others, taking responsibility, and acting with compassion. As winter approached, the family gathered inside the cabin, warmed by the fire and the quiet comfort of one another's presence. Samuel watched Taya tending to the children, her face glowing with care and pride. He felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the safety and happiness of the family, but for the opportunity to be part of something larger than himself. The years of isolation had taught him survival, but this new life had taught him something far more important: the meaning of connection, love, and shared responsibility. And so Samuel Green, the once lone rancher, found fulfillment not only in the land he had tamed, but in the lives he had touched. He had rescued Taya and her daughters from danger, but in doing so, he had discovered the richness of life, the strength of compassion, and the beauty of shared experience. The plains were still vast, wild, and untamed, but they were no longer empty. They were filled with laughter, care, and the warmth of family. Samuel often thought about the moment that had changed everything. The day he had seen Taya in danger. That moment, born of courage and compassion, had transformed his life. It reminded him that one act of kindness could ripple outward, creating bonds, protecting lives, and bringing meaning to even the most solitary existence. He had chosen to act, and in doing so, he had created a life far richer than he could have imagined. Years passed, and the family continued to thrive on the plains. Samuel, Taya, and the children worked together, laughed together, and faced challenges side by side. The ranch became a place of safety and comfort, a testament to courage, care, and the power of human connection. Samuel had learned that true fulfillment came not from solitude, but from embracing life with others, from nurturing and protecting, and from the quiet joy of shared existence. As the sun set over the plains, Samuel stood with Taya and their daughters watching the golden light touch the horizon. He felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that the family he had formed was strong, safe, and happy. The years of loneliness had been transformed into a life of connection, and the plains, once vast and empty, were now filled with warmth, laughter, and love. Samuel Green had found not only a family, but a purpose, a life worth living fully, together. And in that moment, as the wind swept across the endless fields, he understood something he had never known in his years of solitude. The greatest strength was not in living alone, but in living for others, in protecting those who could not protect themselves, and in finding joy, hope, and love in the lives we touch.